Turn the lights down, and just put this on.
Let's be heard. Greetings to our loyal members of the Garbage Gang. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mike G, and you're participating in Mike G and the Garbage Gang podcast. First order of business, we want to thank WFYL for putting us over the airwaves for the last 6 years. If you're unaware, WFYL has sold the station, but we forge ahead as Mike G and the Garbage Gang podcast. We've got some excellent episodes ahead for you. And if you want to be a member of the Garbage Gang, we need you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. So without further ado, we've got our first guest on Mike G and the Garbage Gang podcast. We've got Dr. Stan Ridgley. And Dr. Ridgley is a full clinical professor of business at Drexel University. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
And he's got a brand new book. It's out there. It's called DEI Exposed. We're going to talk a lot about that today. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ridgley, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with the Garbage Gang and you.
Absolutely. You're a member of the Garbage Gang at this point in time.
Delighted.
So, what I want to talk about first is what motivated you to write this book?
I have to say the circumstances with which I was presented back in 2021, at the height of the BLM riots in the cities, the unrest that went by nationwide, and I was expecting our university not to succumb to this type of pandemonium and chaos, and I was severely disappointed when I saw the president of the university basically went prostrate and opened the doors to all kinds of barbarism, alchemy, astrology, pseudoscience, all in the name of showing support for a felon who was shot and killed in the streets of Minneapolis, as if my university had something to do with it. Of course, we did not. Neither did any other university in America. And yet we found president after president of these major institutions going prostrate, supine, opening the doors and saying, please forgive us. And we're going to implement DEI to atone for our sins. And it was literally an absolution that university presidents were asking for to prevent the type of unrest that we saw in the streets from coming to the universities. And when I saw our university go down that road, how disappointed I was, I decided that, well, that's not for me. And someone has to speak up and say, look, this is crazy. And I think that now, 5 years later, we're seeing that a lot of people are saying, well, we bought into a big con, hence the subtitle of my book, DEI Exposed, How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education.
Now, weren't these mostly peaceful protests, though? Isn't that what we heard? Well, a few fires break out. Big deal, no?
Well, that's the day. I mentioned this in the book, that the icon of the fires burning in the background with the announcers saying, well, these are mostly peaceful protests. When buildings are literally burning behind the man. It was a summer, unrest seems to be too gentle a word for it. It was a summer of rioting, a summer of violence, $2 billion worth of business damage done to some of the poor segments of our society, all in the name of we don't even know what.
That bottle of water I gave you before we started, that is mostly not poison, so you're going to be okay. It's mostly not poison, mostly water. So ultimately, this was a very difficult time, I'd imagine, for people to come up and speak out about something like this. I mean, I remember we had the days where people were supposed to post a black square on the social media, and there was a lot of pressure from other people to do that, and if you didn't, you were somehow a racist, particularly in your field in higher education. It must have been very disconcerting for your career, no?
Well, certainly I lamented that it might be. And I think what you just described, this idea of having icons and symbols, and that you must post these types of things. I think Václav Havel, who was the playwright and the first president of the newly freed Czech Republic, after the fall of communism, he wrote a very powerful and essay that describes this very phenomenon, where he gives us the example of the greengrocer under communist Czechoslovakia. The greengrocer is required to put something in his window, and it's a motto that says, "Workers of the world unite." Now he knows that he doesn't know what the thing means. He doesn't care one way or the other, but he knows for a fact that if he doesn't put the poster in his window, he's going to be in some kind of trouble, and he doesn't want to find out what kind of trouble that is. And so we see the very same thing on the college campuses, establishing these signs. You'll see like "I'm an ally" kind of sign, and you post that. And if you don't post it, well, you're sending a signal. If you don't post your pronouns, you're sending some kind of signal. You're marking yourself as someone who is not part of the regnant clique on the campus.
But you were ahead of the curve, because I think we're starting to see the tide shift to some degree. I heard that Pete Buttigieg took his pronouns out of his bio. I don't know whether it's on social media or what, but we're seeing a little bit of a pullback from this. Is that true?
I think it's true. It's very true. I'm delighted with the pace of change, which has really surprised me, how rapid this change has come in the first 100 days of the new administration. Good things coming out of the Department of Education, good things coming out of the Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights. And I did tack against the wind back in 2021 and have been tacking against the wind, but suddenly the winds are blowing favorably, and we see DEI in retreat on college campuses nationwide. Now we have to be vigilant, because when they say they're pulling back on DEI, they're really, I'll give you an example. At the University of Virginia, they have merely changed the names of the titles of the people running the programs. They've changed the names of the programs themselves. And I think as America First Legal has done a nice expose on this and triggered a Department of Justice investigation of UVA, University of Virginia, because they have side by side the website where the text has not changed, very little. And the titles have changed, but the people are the same, and it's the same program. So they're trying to continue to run their DEI programs at UVA, which cost $20 million a year, I should say. And the top two administrators receive $500,000 apiece in salary and benefits. So it's a very expensive proposition. And a lot of people have dug their heels in on the college campuses, don't want to see these programs in, because it's going to be, they'll take a hit to the pocketbook and have to go find some honest work somewhere.
You know, I'm obviously not an expert on this, and a lot of members of the garbage gang who are tuning in, they're not experts on this. What is DEI really when it comes down to it?
Mike, it's really what DEI is not. Let's talk about what it's not, because most people, good people, I mean, people of goodwill, virtuous people, they're virtuous, they'll tell you. They believe that DEI is an unmitigated good. It's good, right, moral, proper, the right thing to do. And you ask them what it is, they'll say something like this. Well, it's creating a level playing field. It's giving everyone a fair shot. It's just teaching about race, isn't it? It's just teaching about slavery. It's the right thing to do, isn't it? Well, it's none of those things. What I just described to you would be a kind of an uber affirmative action, which we've had for many, many years. DEI is actually a toxic doctrine ideology that divides people into two categories only: villains or victims, oppressors or oppressed, exploiters or exploited. And this is determined only by the color of your skin. You'll see and hear DEI bureaucrats on the campus say, well, we're going to look at this through the lens of race, which is kind of a metaphorical way of saying we're going to bring race into the calculation. Well, they look at everything through this lens of race. Everything is affected by race. There's no more important category. Not your parents, not your lived experience, not your education, not your upbringing. None of those things matter to the DEI cadre on, say, the college campuses. I speak primarily of the college campuses, although a lot of this is true for corporate America as well. So you are a villain if you happen to be a white person, and you are racist, and all of this is, you live in a racist country, a racist America that is riven with white supremacy culture. This is what they train on the college campuses, without exception. This is their doctrine, but you will not hear it expressed that way from DEI people when they're speaking in public. Instead, you'll get some sort of version of what I just told you. I'll give you an example to the gang listening. and to you, of course, where you and I, Mike, were walking down the street and we see someone coming towards us. Ordinarily, you and I, brought up on Enlightenment traditions. Well, we just won't make any judgment whatsoever. We don't know who they are. We don't really care who they are, but they catch our eye, okay, and they move on. But if you and I are partaking of and imbued with this doctrine of DEI, then you and I see something very different. We see a villain or a victim based on the color of their skin, and nothing else is important about that person. We make judgments about these people. They're called stereotypes. We draw those stereotypes, and they are serious, noxious stereotypes about people, and they're non-redemptive. If you're a white person, you are a villain. And that's the best you can do is acknowledge that, confess your sins, and work to achieve an anti-racist ethos. And so this is the real problem with DEI, and it's what I talk about in DEI Exposed. Basically getting people, good people who believe in it, getting them to open their eyes and say, you know what you're believing or what you're propounding really isn't so. That's really tough nut to crack, I'll tell you that.
It seems pretty regressive in nature because
Yeah.
you're not starting from the standpoint that everybody's to be judged on their own merits, whether it has to do with the workplace and best person for the job, whatever the case may be. You're really being prejudicial towards everybody, right?
Well, yes, you are. You have already categorized them one of two categories, good or evil. This is it goes way back thousands of years to the ancient Persian. I don't want to get too off track here. The ancient Persian cleric by the name of Mani, Mani, and this is called Manichaeism, the modern word Manichaeism, which means we have a doctrine here of good and evil, of the light and the dark, and there's nothing in between. And this is Ibram Kendi, who wrote his famous book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. He propounds this doctrine. You're either a racist or an anti-racist. There's nothing else. There's no other category there. Well, this is absurd. It's absurd, but people were afraid to call out the absurdity of this. He's a mediocre scholar. I'm sure he's not a bad guy. I've seen as many of his interviews. I've read his books. Really a kind of a coincidence. He was at Temple University when I was getting my IMBA, International MBA. He was there on the other side of campus doing whatever it is he was doing. And he wrote a very fine book called Stamped from the Beginning when he came out of Temple, which won the National Book Award. Not a bad book at all. And then he wrote his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which garnered him really undeserved acclaim as being some sort of top-notch scholar. Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter have really given the lie to this nonsense. And Ibram Kendi, started at American University and then moved to Boston University when he got this massive influx of cash after the death of George Floyd. His center has collapsed at Boston University. Now he's moved on to Howard University. Howard University appears to be collecting a host of washed-up types. Howard University now has Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was another DEI type of person. I think her name is Nicole Hannes. I can't get her name right. Never can. The woman who did the 1619 project at the New York Times. She is now also at Howard University, applying her trade. And Nicole Hannah Jones. I'm sorry, I can't get the name right, but I'm going to get it before the show's over. But so we find out that these people are propounding this doctrine. It's a doctrine that people really, it's kind of depressing, as you mentioned. It's depressing doctrine. It's regressive in the sense it's simply not true. It's a rejection of the Enlightenment values of humanity and progress and scientific method. And it embraces and brings in the notion that composite stories and essays and testimonials and how I feel about this, these are all just as important as, say, the work of a scientist who was working in the field of physics or a mathematician working in the field of math. It is really a bizarre, strange doctrine that has arrived on the college campuses without much needed scrutiny and criticism.
So did you face some backlash in your field as a result? Did you have colleagues or administration speak out against you for what you were saying at the time?
No, not publicly. I think that what I was saying was, first of all, let me just say, I on the college campus, I'm pretty much a middle of the road guy. Okay, I'm a traditional libertarian kind of guy, live and let live, free market economy, individual liberty, that kind of thing. Second Amendment guy and First Amendment guy, but that's considered far right on the average college campus. And I think that they were so taken aback and so surprised that I was so publicly out with what I consider common sense, rather than acceding to the groupthink that was being purveyed on our campus, rather than acceding to the groupthink that you'll see nationwide, where if you're not part of this particular conversation, what's called the Overton window, things that you can talk about in public, and outside that window, oh, that's verboten. It's taboo. You can't do that. Well, I was well outside the Overton window, but I was never in your face about it. I wasn't marching down the hallways and saying this and saying that. No.
Writing books about it.
Writing books about it so that you could buy it if you so chose.
Okay.
You can. And actually, I was very impressed. The Pennsylvania University of Penn bookstore actually carried my book and had it up front. I was very impressed with that.
Wow.
One of the few things that I'm impressed with when I think of University of Pennsylvania, but no, it's not been a bad thing. I do know that behind the scenes there's some people who do not really like me. I don't get a lot of invitations to lunch, if that's what you mean, but I have an awful lot. I will tell you this: a lot of student supporters and a lot of faculty supporters. The kind of people who don't want to do this sort of thing. They want to stay inside that Overton window, but they love the message that I'm providing, which is 100% true.
Do they support you in secret, behind closed doors, sort of like how Trump supporters, I'd imagine, in your field have to be quiet about that?
Yes, they do support me behind the scenes, emails, messages, stopping by my office, that kind of thing. A lot of students. I should say I'm the faculty advisor for Turning Point USA at Drexel University, which is a signal right there that people.
It's a safe space.
Yes, a safe space that people are going to treat me a certain way because I'm that. But then again, I think it's a two-edged sword. It's a benefit for the university, and they can point to me and say, hey, look what we have. And say, well, look, we're so evenly balanced here. We've got 100 to 1 liberal to conservative, but hey, we do have at least that one.
And do they want that, though? Because as you were saying, it seems if you're not lockstep with the narrative that there's consequences.
Well, one of those things where it's not whether they want it or not, they have to make the best of it, I think. And
they can't get rid of you.
No, I'm not going anywhere. And the thing is that they're doing what I would do. You have to make the best of a situation that it's not what you would choose, but since you have it, how can we turn this to our advantage? How can we make this work for everyone's benefit? That kind of thing.
Do you think a lot of people who did get behind something like DEI were in a similar boat to people who supported Black Lives Matter based on the title and what they believed the message would be, as opposed to what the organization actually stood for? Because when you'd go on their website and they talk about destruction of the nuclear family and things like that, a lot of people are like, whoa, this is pretty Marxist.
Yeah, it is. Patricia Cullors, one of the founders of BLM, was an unabashed Marxist. She says this. It's one of those things where most people who support BLM are unaware of this, and they don't believe you. When you tell this to them,
right,
they won't believe it. They're in denial. Let me give you an example of the kind of denial that you're talking about with respect to my own experience. I'm active on social media, and I'm not self-censoring in any shape when I've written these books, and I advertise the books. There's also something called a white supremacy culture list, white culture list. And I put this on one of the social media platforms, just a list. I took it from one of I'll tell you where I got it from in a moment. I took it from one of the sites, and I posted that and said, here's an example of the type of nonsense that DEI is propounding. And it was. And this woman, this black woman who was the DEI person from Pittsburgh, got on there and said, this is outrageous. So who are you? Why are you publishing this anti-black propaganda? What are your sources? She actually said this. Mm-hmm. I said, well, my source, and here's the link, happens to be the National Museum for African American History and Culture. I got the list from them, and here's the link. And of course, she disappeared. She completely just disappeared. No answer, no nothing. It's one of those things where she thought this actual list and poster that I got from the National Museum of African American Culture. And I look at all of these things, so where I get all this material. It's true material. It's what they say. But people, when they see it, they go into this denial. I never really believed in denial until I actually have experienced this, when people absolutely refuse to listen to what proponents of DEI actually say and listen to what they actually do. It's amazing.
Well, we see that in a lot of areas where people are brainwashed these days.
Yeah.
If I hear about the fine people on both sides thing, again, after all these years,
Yes.
and it takes 60 seconds to watch the entire clip. And you had Biden when he was running for his second term, even bringing that up on national television. It's disgraceful.
And every time they repeat it, more and more people believe it. And then when you finally show it to them, they don't really want to know that they've been wrong. That's one of those things. They've bought into it. They don't want to know that they've been wrong, because that would be an admission that they're flawed. And most people want to have this belief in DEI that it's right, noble, proper. And when they believe this, they look at you or they look at me and they say, well, there must be something wrong with this person. This person must be a bigot. This person must be a racist. And then by saying this, they, of course, have elevated themselves in a very narcissistic sort of way.
You call DEI the con of the century, right?
Yes, I did.
And what you're talking about, the attitude, is very similar to what we see when people get scammed. We often deal with people at our law firm who have been scammed, and a lot of them refuse to acknowledge that they've been scammed. They don't want to believe that they've been scammed, and they'd rather leave it alone than do something to try to make it right, whether it's pursuing criminal charges or trying to get reimbursed. They just don't want, they're embarrassed, I guess.
Yes, and I guess it's a real blow to their ego, and that they're invested in what they thought was doing the right thing. It is a scam. In fact, this scam has an actual name to it. Psychologists call this the scam of virtuous victimhood. And this is what DEI proponents did in summer of 2020 all the way to 2021 to open the door to academia. The virtuous victimhood scam is basically, if you can get people to believe that you're a victim, is one thing. That's the story. That's the scam. I'm a victim. And if I can get you to believe that you are the villain that has victimized me, then I can then engage a resource extraction strategy. This is what the psychologists call it, a resource extraction strategy whereby you will pay a certain type of reparations to me, the villain. I'm the victim. And so the doors were opened to the DEI en masse, and these mediocrities flowed onto the campuses, not in positions of faculty, but in positions of bureaucracy, highly paid bureaucracy, embracing this toxic ideology, teaching fake courses called in the co-curriculum, and basically training people, students, faculty, and staff, that there's this two-category racialist reality in America. And we're using this racial reckoning, that's one of their terms, racial reckoning, to explain to you that you are either a villain or a victim based on the color of your skin. Nothing else is important. Colleges and universities bought into this and paid millions of dollars. The industry is $10 billion a year right now. It's slowly ratcheting back as colleges and businesses wake up to the scam. But it's an amazing scam in the sense that when I'm talking about millions of dollars. At University of Michigan, they began a DEI program in 2016. It's been running all the way up to today. It's actually now being ended because of the executive orders. It cost Michigan $250 million. And the head of the program, Robert Sellers, was pulling in $431,000 when he left the position in 2022 and was replaced by his wife, Tabia Shavu Sellers, who's now leaving Michigan at the end of the summer. She's leaving with the $417,000 a year salary. Lord knows what they're doing to earn those salaries. I should say they're not earning them; they're receiving those salaries. So it's a very lucrative profession for these people.
Did you get to watch the movie Am I Racist with Matt Wallace?
That was so funny.
It was fantastic.
Especially the Robin DiAngelo segment.
It was excellent. They're not willing to put their money where their mouth is in all these situations.
He actually fooled her into going to her purse to give reparations to his producer.
It also shows, as you were talking about before, the social pressure that's involved with this sort of thing, where if you don't do X, Y, or Z, then you are a racist. Yeah. And who's setting those rules?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I should tell you, when the cadre came onto the campuses, these are modestly educated people, these DEI people. They're not experts in anything. They are not faculty by any stretch, but they are imbued with this doctrine that I mentioned to you, and they will try to worm their way into every corner of the campus. Those are their words, not mine. Into every corner of the campus. And what we'll have is these DEI officers will be assigned to various units on the academic units on the campus, where it's almost like the old Soviet Union had political officers that were assigned to military units. Now, these political officers were not really military officers. They had a different hierarchy, and they would report up the chain on the political reliability of the unit to which they were assigned. Very similar to what we have with regard to DEI, where you have these political officers, DEI officers, reporting on the enthusiasm or lack of enthusiasm of faculty and interfering with faculty hiring, faculty teaching, with the curriculum, trying to imbue and these people have no clue as to what they're doing. They're not faculty, they're not experts, they have no business in there.
Now, since you've brought up the Soviet example, I've got to say that every so often, more frequently than you would think, we get accused of being Russian propaganda on this program, as if I've practiced Second Amendment law for 10 years and been in conservative television and radio for 5 or 6 years, all so I can make these clips of Russian propaganda. So with that, ты знаешь русский язык, да?
Я говорю по-русски.
Изучил русский язык в школе давно. Мой русский язык очень плохо, не
Вы
практикую.
знаете, что я говорю по-русски только медленно и плохо, как вы. Right?
Their heads are going to explode now.
Well, I tell you, I
Russian
was a military intelligence officer. I was a Russian linguist. I served in West Germany, in West Berlin, listening to our Glavny Vrag, the main enemy. And I've been to Russia about 20 times. And I studied Lomonosov State University for 3 months in the summer of 2005. So I'm very familiar with the whole Cold War situation. And I do know that the media has been engaged in, I've been doing it for 15 years now, basically demonizing Russia, not Putin, but demonizing Russia. So it's a very easy black hat, white hat narrative to maintain. And when you do that, it makes it very easy to slot new stories into it. Oh, the Russians are involved in the black hat.
Yeah.
You know, nothing is. It's very much like the DEI folks who say, well, nothing matters except race. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters with Russia. They're the bad guys. Don't you know that? They have the language sounds like they're bad guys, almost as bad as German. And there's the bad guys in the movies. It's easy to do.
But, you know, when people make these comments on the clips, they'll just say this is obviously Russian propaganda. They won't address the merits of what's being said in those clips.
No, they never do.
It's just a way to brush it off like that. I want to go back to what you were talking about, how your university to some degree says, look, we've got this gentleman who shares this opposing view. And today, that seems like that's a great thing. It seems like, isn't this amazing that they're not ousting this person who has an opposing viewpoint? But is it really a commentary on the sad state of higher education if that's the best that we have to offer is, oh, look, we allow this one guy to say what he actually thinks, and the baseline is really that low, the bar is really that low in higher education, that this is some kind of wonderful achievement?
Well, I think it's important for people to understand the university does not exist as they think it does. I think most people, parents especially, have a view of the university as it existed maybe 20, 25 years ago, when there was still a vestige of the Enlightenment University. Oh, it's just a place where all these different ideas and perspectives can come and can contend in the marketplace. And all you have to do is ensure that you are well-versed in your ideas, and you can make that argument, and may the best argument win. And if something is found lacking, well, it's ushered out the door, and new ideas are it's not what's going on. Okay, no.
But that's the whole point of higher education.
It should be,
right?
but it's not. What we have now, I'll give you Frederick Jameson, who's a Marxist theorist. He may have passed away recently. When I was at Duke University back in the late 80s, he said this openly and publicly. The purpose of the university is to train students in Marxism for the struggles of the future. That was what he said. I mean, he was never secretive about it, but they don't care because there's no peer pressure not to say or believe that sort of thing. No, that's not the purpose of the university. The purpose of the university is grounded in logic and progress and reason and scientific method and humane values, and to, as Matthew Arnold said, to teach and pass on the best that has been thought and said. And again, it's that marketplace of ideas. That's the way it should be. But what it has become is this this enshrinement of a point of view. It's called social justice, and you'll find this on virtually every website in America. There's some sort of doffing the hat to social justice. Now, that's a proxy. It's basically fig leaf for socialism. It really is. Everything, the DEI flows under the banner of social justice. I will say, some colleges, Bryn Mawr College is an example, I'll name names, that funds student activism, that will reimburse students for travel to protests, but only certain types of protests.
Really?
Yes. You go on their website. It's right there. They're reimbursing students to engage in activism. Well, for me, I said, I don't want my students who are engaging in activism. I want them in the classroom. Activism is not a pedagogical technique. It's basically I think that the bureaucrats and some of the faculty are marshaling support for various causes and turning out the students to protest this or that social justice action. And that's what their agenda is. And I think students get duped into that.
That seems to also be a parallel to what we see in the government today, because a lot of people's response to them sending people to certain protests and not others, I presume they're not going to reimburse people for going to Harrisburg for the Second Amendment Day over at the Capitol.
No.
And most people, their response would be, well, that's not fair. If they're going to fund them, they need to fund people to go to the Second Amendment Day. When in reality, the point that you brought up is this isn't the role of higher education in the first place, and they need to be in the classroom. We need to get rid of all of this. In the government, as we see in our generation, it's people arguing over who has better ideas in their view, and people will vote for the person that they believe has better views, as opposed to questioning, does the government have this authority in the first place?
Exactly. I think that taxes is a good example. The argument is always over paying your fair share of taxes and giving someone a tax break, as if allowing someone to keep more of what they earn is a break for them.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I'm a big believer in the Second Amendment. I've spoken at the NRA National Conference. I've spoken at some of their fundraisers in Miami at one of the Trump establishments, as a matter of fact, and very good people, very good people. And it's the Second Amendment is an excellent example of the type of activity that colleges will not reimburse students for. I will tell you, how do they get around or get away with encouraging student activism, which is really not something they should be doing at all, only a certain type of activism. They call it leadership training. This is in their literature. I do a lot of the reading of their literature. I mean, too much reading of their literature. And they actually have talked about camouflaging their activist courses where they train students to engage in protests. What are their legal rights? What can they get away with? What can they not get away with? And they call it leadership training. And this is how they manage to circumvent any kind of criticism. We're teaching leadership. They're teaching people how to go out on the street, carry signs that have been made for them, and how to occupy buildings, that sort of thing. And that is actually being done on the college campuses. There's also a fake curriculum on many college campuses where they even offer a fake transcript. It's called a co-curriculum. And it's made to look an awful lot like the actual curriculum in which I teach. The curriculum where the actual courses that give grades. There are some schools like St. John's and Westchester University that actually give a transcript for this co-curriculum of activities that are taught by the bureaucrats that I've talked about coming onto the campuses and outnumbering conservatives, I should say, 12-1. That is the ratio. The ratio of faculty, liberal to conservative faculty, is 6-1, and that was research conducted by my colleague at Sarah Lawrence University, Samuel Abrams, 6-1. But the bureaucracy that really control who comes into the university, who controls the university 24/7, the bureaucracy is 12-1 liberal to conservative, and it's getting worse.
My contracts professor in law school always said that there were only 2 registered Republicans on the staff, him being one, and he said the other was only a Republican because he was still pissed off at Andrew Jackson, who was an Indian law professor. And is so 6-1 to me sounds like that would have been great.
It's pretty good. Oh, it's great. It's great.
And this is Tulsa, Oklahoma we're talking about. This is not Southern California.
You know that the problem with these with the faculty. In any case, the squeaky wheels to get all the attention. It makes it seem like all faculty, more faculty than are far left. And you get people like Joseph Massad at Columbia University standing on the steps of Columbia University celebrating the attacks on Israel October 7th. You get all of these wacko statements that really are designed to achieve headlines, knowing full well that the university will do nothing to them. That's changing now, however. You can't get away with threatening people, bullying people, assaulting people, vandalism, trespassing on the college campus. Can't get away with that anymore. And we're finding that there are actual consequences, rapidly, applied consequences to this kind of behavior. I think it's refreshing.
Yeah, and we talk about the Second Amendment and the responsibilities that come with that right. And the same thing with the First Amendment. You can't use speech to harm people. And we're not talking about somebody's feelings or anything like that.
Yes,
offending
I think
people.
Yeah,
you don't have a right to not be offended, but
it's one of those things where I think the free speech and academic freedom, they're kind of conflated at times, but people don't seem to understand that you cannot go on the campus and talk about globalizing the Intifada when what that means is I saw an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that says, well, this is the lingo that they use. They kind of use an anodyne, antiseptic rhetoric when they talk about, globalizing the Intifada. That may make some Jewish students uncomfortable, but that's the price we have to pay for a free system. No. It's not making them feel uncomfortable. It's making them feel fear for their lives because it's an explicit call for genocide. That's what globalizing the Intifada means. You just threatened someone's life.
Calling for eradication is probably not.
Yeah, that's
a little bit beyond offensive.
Well, it makes me feel uncomfortable that you're calling for my murder.
But these same people will be offended by things that are somewhat, benign, right?
Well, using the wrong pronouns, that kind of thing, or misgendering someone.
Sure.
Or one of my favorites.
Even if it's not done intentionally or maliciously.
Yeah. The racial microaggression is one of the greatest contrived pieces of nonsense. There's actually a research project that is involved with the racial microaggression. Daryl Wing Sue and Lisa Spanierman. Daryl Wing Sue is at Columbia Teachers College, and Lisa Spanierman is a psychologist at Arizona State University. They've teamed on this racial microaggressions in everyday life. And this is basically, if you say something that makes someone feel uncomfortable, even though you might not have been talking to them, or they overhear you, or you say something that sounds benign, but if someone takes offense at it, it's automatically a racial microaggression. And what your intention was and what the actual wording of it was, there's no objective measure of it. You're wrong. And you will be hauled up, or they will tally this as a racial incident on the campuses. They've done this at Cornell. I talk about this in my book, DEI Exposed, where the racial microaggression is used to pump up the number of racial instances on the campuses, because Lord knows you can't find any racist incidents on the campus. It's just not it's declining, if anything. And so I think that, let me give you an example of the type of thing we're talking about here, practical example. July 4, 2020, Princeton University. There was a lot of hand-wringing over the George Floyd thing. That Princeton somehow was guilty. I don't know how, but we'll skip that for a moment. Guilty, and 300 faculty and staff signed an open letter that held Princeton University accountable and accused Princeton University of rampant racism. Accused the university. Well, there's one journalist named Connor Friedersdorf at The Atlantic, the only good journalist they have at The Atlantic. He actually did what a journalist is supposed to do. He contacted all 300 of those signatories and said, can you give me an example of rampant racism on your campus anytime from the last 15 years? Here you had 300 of people who none of whom could give a single example of rampant racism over the previous 15 years. That's damning evidence right there. It's damning. And even Randall Kennedy, a very famous law professor, a black law professor at Harvard, said, why are you doing this? He says, campuses, college campuses, are the least racist places in America. And you're spending your will spending on all of this nonsense. There's no racism here.
The federal government recently began processing applications under the 925C Relief from Disabilities Program. If you're federally prohibited from owning and possessing firearms, you shouldn't wait. You have to act now while this program's available. Visit us at thegunlawfirm.com and schedule a free case strategy session to determine whether you're a good candidate. Back to the episode. You know, you talked about how people getting involved with the social justice, and obviously we're talking a bit about DEI here. This is the same class of people who typically have turned away from Christianity, turned away from God. Do you think that to some degree these values that they've set up here have become a replacement for something like religious beliefs or religious code?
You know, I can't really speak for them and their motives, but from looking from the outside, you can say, well, people are always searching for something. And these people tend to be borderline personalities, people who are always on the edge, people who are indeed, their lives are empty for whatever reason. They reject society as it exists. When I was a military intelligence guy in West Germany, dealing with the Baader-Meinhof gang and the Red Army faction, the profile of the average German terrorist in the Red Army faction, Barbara Meyer was one of them. The profile was these were disaffected, upper middle class kids who had no idea of the sacrifices that had gone into creating a society that gave them the life that they were enjoying. They were disaffected, and they were basically attracted to the nostrums of Karl Marx at that time, which basically has no plan of how to achieve this utopia, but they were entranced with the idea of utopia. And I think that Marx is a secular religion. I think there've been enough written on that to settle that question. I think that yes, that people are looking for something in their lives, something they can bend the knee to, give fealty to. And if you look at these folks, they talk a lot about morality and moral clarity, but they never get around to talking about where their morality is coming from. What moral code are they subscribing to? Is it something they just assume that you and I are going to accept that? Because, wow, this must be a good person talking about morality. Well, what's your morality? Where does it come from? Is it Christian? Yeah. Is it Jewish? What is it?
It becomes very difficult when you don't have that compass. Yeah. It doesn't change with time because we've seen a lot of these things change. We're seeing the shift over the last few years, just as you said. It happens within the blink of an eye. And if you don't have that compass that's timeless, then you're going to be in all different directions.
I tell you, this is what you just mentioned there. Just gave me thought that a lot of the prisoners of war that were in Vietnam, the only thing that gave them solace and was their moral grounding, their Christian grounding, their grounding that kept them going, that kept them surviving years of captivity. It wasn't some sort of theory of a secular scribbler like Karl Marx or Franz Fanon or any of these, George Lukács, any of these characters who purport to offer an alternative to what they believe to be the opiate of the people, as Lenin called Christianity, called religion. And so I think that this really, you bring up a really good question when you talk about what is it, are they trying to, it's not good enough for them to say, we want DEI. We have to eliminate contenders, the contenders. And this is shown in the orientation when students come in, when they want to decouple students from their parents. Now, I talk about that in my previous book from 2023, Brutal Minds, where orientation people, the student bureaucracy, wants to decouple students from, in that important initial several weeks, decouple students from their parents. They dislike parents. They call them helicopter parents, toxic parents. These are parents, they're trying to retrain the kids, trying to change that belief system that they were brought up with, usually a traditional religious upbringing, and basically how to be a good person. And they're trying to retrain people out of that.
That's something else. And you were saying that it's not what it was 20, 25 years ago. I wonder if it was even longer than that, because I recall around 2007, 2008, signing up for a class called Masculinities. And I see the title and I say, great, this is going to be about dude stuff. We're going to go smoke cigars and shoot guns and watch football, right? Boy, was I wrong. It was taught by a female who had a child with another female, and the whole entire class was about how white Christian men are the devil. That was the entire premise of the class. And you couldn't say anything otherwise. we'd have discussions about it and everything like that. But it almost seemed like they brought up differences, as you were saying, created these differences in order to divide everybody.
Yeah.
I have got a friend of mine who worked for the federal government for many years, a Hispanic gentleman, and I asked him about all the race questions on the federal forms, firearms, the ATF 4473 and stuff, and his opinion was that race is something that was invented to divide us. And it seemed like this class was really geared towards that.
Yep.
It was bringing up distinctions that none of us in the class had ever even thought about day to day. It wouldn't come up, but it was being put on somebody's fault, right?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of these folks, what they're actually teaching is a warmed over Marxism, and it's being offered or proffered not as, they don't want to use the M word. They sure as heck are not going to use the C word. They use the F word, which is Frere. Now, they found a kind of a proxy, or a guy through whom they can launder their ideas, and that proxy is Paulo Freire. He was a Brazilian educator who wrote a very famous book, important book, called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And if you go to education schools, this guy is revered. And he was a Maoist, not just a Marxist, but a Maoist who admired the Cultural Revolution, who admired Lenin, who admired Stalin. He put this in writing. This is not something that you have to gin up and make up. And so you look at this, and this is what's being taught to our teachers in schools, and this is what is being taught to our students. And they're getting students to embrace this idea that what divides us is more important than what unifies us. And I think that this idea, you touched on a very important point just now when you're talking about focusing on these differences, and then not just differences, but you have to load some content in there where someone is a villain and someone is a victim. It can't just be, oh, look at this diversity we have here. Isn't it wonderful? Well, no. Some of you are villains and some of you are victims. And that's what this class is all about. And you have to confess your villainhood, or you have to acknowledge that you are indeed a victim and take it out on the villains in the class. This is indoctrination. This is exactly what it looks like. It's not something like indoctrination. This is indoctrination.
You mentioned Turning Point. I believe it was Charlie who recently put out something about whenever he sees a diverse captain of an airline, he thinks in his head, is this somebody who's truly qualified, or are they there because of some DEI initiative? And people jumped on him and said, why would you go to that first? Why would your brain go there first? It's there because they have put it there, right?
Yeah.
It's because of all this stuff being promoted based upon DEI as opposed to merit, that people have those thoughts at this point in time. Does that translate over to higher education in any way, shape, or form?
I find that hard to answer because I don't deal in that sort of thing. And I deal with students as they come into my classroom. All the diverse students. We have 25%, I think, international students, and we have students from Russia and China and India and Japan and Albania, believe it or not, Poland and Africa, a number of countries in Africa. And I deal with students as they present themselves, and I just want them to do the work, And so I think that there's an unnecessary stigma that DEI puts onto people. It's a burden that doesn't need to be there. When someone works hard and is genuinely solid, excellent person, and basically pursuing and living the Frederick Douglass admonition that you should work. That was his big in his I think it was his most famous speech called "Self-Made Men." Work, 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 work. He said it 4 times. This is the magic formula here. Go over obstacles, go around them, but work like I think Mark Cuban said something along the lines of work like there's someone over there working 24/7 to take everything away from you, and that was his admonition. He says, "Yeah, you got problems. Everyone's got problems. Yours may be of a certain type," and so I think that what we have now is students that actually believe that. And I provide my students that speech by Frederick Douglass, Self-Made Men. So I don't encounter that kind of thing. I know that on other parts of the campus, however, that might be an issue because of the different character. I in the business school, right?
So they don't gravitate towards business if they're there for the wrong reasons.
I don't think that they do. I think that people who want to succeed, create wealth, make people, make other people better, do something for other people by creating something that they want, and you can engage in fruitful exchange.
But regardless of race or gender or anything like that, I'm sure there've been instances over the years where you take a look at a student or listen to what they have to say, and you say, yeah, this guy don't belong here, or
well, I've had
this college thing ain't for you. I know I've looked at classmates and said, this guy's an idiot. No?
I can't say that I've had any idiot in my class. I teach at a good school. So Drexel is a pretty good school. And I think that I've had one person in all my years who looked like she had been brainwashed with respect to the litany. You can tell when someone's been brainwashed. They begin to use the cliches, the stereotypes. They use the rhetoric, and it's really easy to figure out where they're coming. You can almost predict what they're going to say next. But they think, and this is key here. They think that they are talking at a higher plane, because when I mentioned the Freirean thing and everyone coming in, they believe that they have what is called critical consciousness, and that you, Mike, and me, and the garbage gang, we have false consciousness. And the only thing that's necessary for us to gain critical consciousness is to allow ourselves to be trained by them. And this is really a Bowdlerization of Marx's old notion of class consciousness. The idea that your beliefs come from your class and there's going to be class conflict. Well, now we have racial conflict and we have critical consciousness. And for us to succeed in higher education, we have to come to what is called critical consciousness. And you're just not there yet. If you keep talking about Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, and all of these Republican ideas, the free market economics, then that just means you still have false consciousness. So it's a kind of a tautological, circular reasoning kind of thing. And that's one of the big problems, because students are intoxicated by this type of thing. They feel that, wow, I've been brought into the priesthood. I'm part of the anointed now. And this is why they have such a problem. Parents have a real problem with their kids when they go home for that Thanksgiving break. Kids think that they're stupid, right? Because you just don't have critical conscious, Mom. You're not critically conscious, Dad.
That always irritated me, even when I was that age,
right.
Is meeting somebody who thought they knew a lot about life because they went to college.
Mm-hmm.
And this is because I grew up with a working man father who did not go to college and saw all the things that he had to do in order to provide for us and everything like that. And you have these people who have never paid a bill, and they go to a semester of college and they think they know a lot about the way the world works.
And they want to lecture you, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you think that people's upbringing sort of impacts their susceptibility to these views?
I'd be a fool if I said it didn't impact them. I think it has a lot to do with it. But I will give the example of David Horowitz, who recently passed, a good friend of mine. I asked him, this is years and years ago, probably back in the 90s. I said, David, he was speaking at one of my conferences. I said, David, most people grow up, rebelling against their parents. You had both your parents were card-carrying communists. Most people don't even realize that. They were members of the Communist Party. I mean, why didn't you rebel? Because he was a young leftist. He says, well, Stan, I did rebel. I became a socialist. That was his idea of rebellion. Moving to the right, he became a socialist and an icon for socialism throughout the 60s, and the editor of Ramparts magazine, which was the Jane Fonda go-to thing. So I think that the upbringing, kids want to rebel against their parents, and they do that especially when they're given ammunition by these folks at college. The idea that their parents went to college and might know something it just escapes them. They're just too familiar, and that breeds contempt. But they go to college, you've got this professor of education usually, or politics, who gives them these notions without giving the alternative views. They say, oh, by the way, these ideas that I'm teaching you about Marx have been debunked. And here are the people who've debunked them. They don't do that. They do not do that. They say, well, we're going to look at Antonio Gramsci. We're going to look at the head of the Communist Party. Look at George Lukács. We're going to look at Karl Marx. We're going to look at the Frankfurt School and we're going to go to a higher plane of understanding and lift you to critical consciousness. This is the benefit of education today. Well, it's a kind of a fraud whenever you really look at it. The people who are in control of that agenda are not playing with a full deck. They're not allowing all viewpoints to be heard in the classroom. I've seen this.
You know, you keep ripping on George Lucas. I think a lot of our garbage gang members might be fans of Star Wars, though, so we've got to be careful about that. I got
That was
that right?
his prior, before Star Wars, he was a Marxist theorist, you know.
Okay.
George Lucas was a Hungarian guy back in the 1920s. He was a member of the Communist Party. Now, again, I'm not going to get into it, but what his big contribution to Marx was this. So I think it's hilarious. Because Marx had been suffering all the way up from the time of his death to the 20s, that none of his predictions were coming true. Think about this. None of his and so it was suffering. And this guy, George Lukács, came up with the idea that it doesn't matter that his predictions are not coming true. There is an inner, deeper truth to Marx. And he actually wrote this in The History of Class Consciousness. That was the name of his book. And people latched onto that.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a genius.
Yeah, I mean, that's something.
Imagine being able to get away with that.
Isn't that something?
You're hanging out with your buddy late at night, and you're like, hear me out. Here's my idea. And you're like, that's ridiculous. They'll never buy that.
Yeah, I know. It's like when I was taking European Marxism when I was in graduate school, and the guy we were reading Marx, and there's only one place in the entire corpus of his works, in the Capital, for instance, where he, how do you build this new society, Carl? You keep talking about class. How do you build? What's the new society going to be built on? And he says the new society will be designed according to a settled plan. And that's I'm not making that up. That's the only reference he has to how we're going to build this socialist society of the future, where there's no property, there's no money, we're just living this dream in utopia. A settled plan.
It is actually impressive when you think about it, though, right? That they got so many people to buy in and follow along with all of those holes.
Well, it's one of those things is that, let me tell you, why does it keep hanging on? And the left wing, progressives, Wendy Brown and Judith Butler at Stanford, and they actually have a term for the failure of socialism. How can these people possibly continue hanging on to this dream when it's failed time and time and time again, with the added bonus of killing millions of people in the process, looking at the whole 20th century? How can you possibly hang on to this? Well, they consider this a kind of a burden that they bear, and they call this burden left melancholy. They have a name for it. They've written books on this sort of thing. It's called left melancholy. It was Walter Benjamin with the Frankfurt School, all the way up to the present time with Wendy Brown, talking about how this is a guy by the name of Enver Traverso wrote left melancholy. This is the burden that we must bear. And so they kind of they get their butts kicked, in Venezuela, get their butts kicked in Cuba. They kind of retreat, and then they kind of go back to the faculty lounge. They're very well subsidized with their their courses and that kind of thing. They don't have to earn any living, and they begin to theorize again for the next vault we're going to make to establish this social justice paradise on earth.
Did you grow up in Pennsylvania?
No, I grew up I was in the military. My dad was I've been here for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
My dad was in the military. I grew up in Panama and Hawaii and places like that.
And what were the viewpoints like among the people who you spent time with growing up? Like, what were your formative years when you're in high school, college? Are you into politics?
Not really, not at all. I will tell you this, and your viewers will know this movie. One of my favorite movies is Remember the Titans, that true story of T.C. Williams High School. Well, that movie was based on that year that I was a senior in high school playing football in North Carolina. So, it was that same year. And so I can relate to that to a certain extent with Denzel Washington, one of my favorite actors, and all of the stuff. It was a wonderful film that taught some good lessons, I think. And so that's what I think of. I was in a North Carolina town that went through the first years of broke segregation. I was coming from the military, as military schools. There was nothing like that. I had no idea what was going on in a small southern town in North Carolina. I was just flabbergasted at some of the animosities that I saw. I had no idea the history of the area. And so I was kind of buffeted this left and right. There was no politics that I could see. That came later. Yeah.
Was there anything that prompted that?
Well, I was kind of a left winger when I was an undergraduate. I voted for Howard Lee for mayor of Chapel Hill, the first black mayor of a town in North Carolina, and because I was pretty much apolitical. When you're apolitical, you tend to listen to what's being said in the general discourse of the Overton window that I mentioned. And if the Overton windows is all left wing and that's all you're hearing, well, okay, that makes sense. Anger at my parents, all of that kind of stuff. But I was a late bloomer, and I went back to graduate school after I was in the military 10 years later at Duke University. And I was certainly political then.
At Duke?
Oh, yes.
And what was that like? What's the fact that I know that we had a professor at our law school who had attended Duke Law, and he was quite on the left of things.
Well, I was quite a outspoken conservative at the time, and I founded a conservative newspaper at Duke University, and it had a great impact. It was a satirical magazine. You can't have a great impact if you're a student trying to write a serious political tract. No one's listening to you. No one pays attention to you. And I was a graduate student leading a bunch of undergraduates. It was funny. I had the best time making fun of the left, poking fun of the left. I'm a big believer in utilizing Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals against the left.
Yeah.
And that one that he's got, ridicule, is the incredibly powerful weapon. And you use sarcasm, use the ridicule, and it was a wonderful time. And certainly I became kind of well known, far better, more so than I am now. Well known as being this enfant terrible on the campus with respect to conservatism. And this paper lasted 10 years, so it was very good. I think it bridged on into the Stephen Miller time. He came to Duke, I think, in the early 2000s.
Really?
Yeah.
And do you have any of that stuff still laying around anywhere?
My work?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I sure do.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
Some good stuff. It's funny.
Because to this day, there's that whole thing, the left can't meme.
Oh, yeah. Back in that day, the Greenpeace was still a thing back in 88, 89, that kind of thing. So we, in the newspaper, we would print an ad, and this is an ad for getting a subscription to the magazine called the Duke Review. We put an ad, and we put Greenpeace's toll-free number on there, so you could call our toll-free number and get a subscription to the Duke Review. And so we basically turned the left on itself, where you got the leftists calling up the Duke Review, what they thought was the Duke Review, to harass it, when they're really calling up one of their own organizations and costing them money, because 800 numbers cost money.
What about the poor people who wanted to subscribe?
Well, we had other means of getting subscriptions from those people, direct mail, that kind of thing. This is pre-internet era, pre-YouTube. This was just at the dawn of the internet.
Some good stuff, though, right?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was some of that stuff still holds up pretty well.
I bet it does. That's why I'm curious to see it.
Well, make sure you get some of that good stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in good contact with several of my compadres from that time. One of them is a judge down in Georgia. Another one, I'll give you his name, is Ari Redboard is one of them, and another one is Alex Epstein. Alex Epstein worked with my newspaper a couple of years after I did. I knew him very well. He is a big-time libertarian. He writes on issues of energy. He's on the television all the time. And he was part of that cadre of folks that...
For the satirical.
Alex Epstein was one of those folks who wanted to go toward a more serious bent. And this, I think, is what really ended the Duke Review at the time. Because when you're a college student, you have these serious ideas and you want to be taken seriously. And everyone knows that. And no one really cares about the ideas of a youngster. No professor is going to say that, and no person is going to say that. You want people to try out these ideas. But I always say, with the proviso, do some research so you'll know whether an idea is really new or whether it's already been said and done much better. Has it already been tried and failed? Yeah, it's already been tried. That's already failed, and build on that. That's the whole idea of education: is that you find out what's already been tried. It's the best that's been thought and said, like Matthew Arnold said. You find out what's been said. You find out what's been written. Did it work? If it didn't work, can I make this better? And so you build on that.
That brings me to another point, because you'll hear a lot of people say about socialism, well, they just didn't do it the right way when it failed, right? Do you think that people could bring up that same point about DEI when you mention its flaws? They say, well, this just wasn't done the right way. Is there any merit to it in its purest form?
No, I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. The folks they're really hilarious. Socialism was tried, it failed, but they just didn't do the right thing. The people who are trying socialism are the top scholars in the field of socialism. Karl Kautsky was the guy who followed Marx, and he was one of the top scholars that influenced Lenin when they were trying to build socialism again. These were not stupid people. The system just didn't work. It doesn't, still, none of it works. With DEI, I get the same kind of argument now. It's just not being implemented right. It has some flaws, that kind of thing. But again, they're talking, the people who are proponents and opponents of DEI are talking past each other because they're talking about this uber affirmative action idea of DEI, which, by the way, was already struck down 2 years ago in the Supreme Court case, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill. Struck down. You cannot admit people based on racial categories. You cannot do that. It's against the law. It's unconstitutional. But people believe that is DEI when it's really not. And so we have to work around that. Well, that's not DEI. What DEI actually is, and you have to look at the doctrine that I've been describing here, and this is what they're actually teaching. This is what they're actually pushing on students, and this is what they're doing on the college campuses to change the whole ethos of how we do things on the college campuses. And what I think, and I'm leading up to the real answer to your question, is that what could we do to make the dreams of DEI come true? There's these gauzy dreams of establishing this, uplifting underrepresented minorities and doing it in a way that's legal. Well, we can do that, and I will tell you exactly how to do that right now. You can, staying within the boundaries of established law, where you've always been able to do this, offer economically based scholarships and aid based on economic disadvantage. And since we know that African Americans and Hispanics are more economically disadvantaged than other groups, they will benefit disproportionately, to a great extent, from any program that is designed to address the needs of all students, all enrollment students. Now, there are two problems with this, and the reason why we're not going to see it done. This would fix the problem. It would fix the problem and do so in a legal manner. The two big obstacles of this is, one, as stated by Stanford's expert witness in the trial of the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, this would unfairly reward undeserving white students who are economically disadvantaged. It doesn't achieve the goal. It's inefficient. In other words, they would rather see black students go without any type of, and Hispanic students without any, if some white students are benefited by the same program. This was the argument that the Stanford expert witness made. And so that's one thing. The second is, you don't need a massive, expensive, lavishly compensated bureaucracy to make this happen. You can do it with what you have on hand. You don't need these people blaming each other for racism. You don't need people labeling. No, we're just going to lift all boats. We're going to lift all boats. And if you happen to be in more need than this people, you're going to get more help. It's a beautiful, elegant solution that does indeed solve the problem. So that's the way to go about establishing the goals and methods that are perfectly within the bounds of our legal system, and do it right.
But it kills the cash grab is what it comes down to.
It kills the grift. These people are grifters. If you're making $500,000 a year, like the two top guys at UVA, you going to be for that? Right. No.
So what about situations, and I know this doesn't have to do with higher education, but they talk about the Rooney Rule with the NFL fairly often. Yeah. And
refresh me on that, exactly what that.
So the teams have to interview, if there's an opening, one black, or I don't know if it's black or minority head coach. Right. And they were saying that before they imposed that rule, these guys weren't getting the interview.
And what do I think about that?
Yeah. So how does that fit into DEI? I know we're not talking about higher education specifically, because some people will say they weren't getting the interview, so they needed to put in a policy like this in order to make it happen.
Well, a lot of black coaches now have said they don't need that kind of special treatment. Again, it goes back to the heart of, do you want a stigma of on you? Well, I was only invited here because they needed a black man, they needed a Hispanic man, they needed a Native American to coach their football in the pool. I think it's completely artificial. The idea that there should be representation of folks in a particular large population, say admittees to a college, where you have to, we have to have a certain percentage of folks, which is rarely expressed in an exact percentage. We have to have this. And if we don't have this, then we have what is called a disparate impact. And individuals who got rejected from a college can sue, even if they experience no discrimination, based on this doctrine of disparate impact. I think you know this better than I do, right? It's a noxious doctrine, which has just been struck down by the Trump administration in an executive order, saying that no, this is not common sense. You're telling people you're going to allow people to collect damages for discrimination that did not occur. And by striking this kind of, hey, why don't you speak? I'd like to hear something about that disparate impact.
No, it's been quite some time since I've done anything with that. When I was in law school, I was at a firm that did a lot of that sort of litigation. And there were long trials with expert witnesses and everything like that. And the gist of it is, hey, if these numbers aren't adding up, then something must be wrong. Right? This must be a result of some kind of discrimination.
It's got to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is that what's the baseline population? For instance, here in Philadelphia, if you're going to say you're a Samoan American, you're Pacific Islander, are you going to say, well, because I got rejected? There's no population here,
right.
None to speak of.
Well, if you look at the professional sports teams themselves, that would also indicate it's not because they're not trying to give a white guy a chance in the NBA.
Right.
And it's a merit-based system.
You notice the argument doesn't go the other way. It's one of those things where, it's a merit-based, it's meritocracy here in our sports teams. And then we'll come back and say, well, it's easier to measure someone in the 40-yard dash than it is to measure someone's, say, ability to take a standardized test, et cetera, that kind of thing. So, there's the old NBA argument, there's always the NFL argument and the hockey argument, that kind of thing. It should be a program to get underrepresented minorities into hockey, as if there's a problem here. The left is forever creating problems that really do not exist. When you look at something that is self-selecting, you look at something that's regional, like hockey's not played, I don't think, in deep Alabama, for obvious reasons. It's played up north. And you look at lacrosse, you look at these other kind of esoteric sports, and liberals want to create a problem. So where's the diversity? And that gets me to the point of the DE&I, the diversity, then there's the equity, and then there's the inclusion part. Diversity has become this shibboleth, this password that people utter. And I swear I was in a meeting where I was in a DEI meeting, a diversity meeting, because I go to every training I can because I like to see and observe what these people are doing.
And laugh your butt off.
Well, I don't. They watch what they say around me. When I'm in there, they change the readings.
Wow.
And I know this for a fact because I've gotten the readings from my friends who've gone through the very same trainings, and then I go through the training and they kind of culled out some that were a little abrasive and a little too telltale about what they were doing. And then, we're supposed to say a word that comes to mind about what we expect about today. And I swear there's this one woman next to me, she goes, diversity. And it was like, she said it with such gusto and enthusiasm. I said, my gosh, you are so brainwashed. You want to be the first person to say it. What diversity? Well, diversity has no inherent worth. It's not bad. It's not necessarily good. It's just not. It means variety. That's a synonym. In the same way that uniformity, it's neither good, nor bad. It depends on what you're trying to do. And if uniformity happens to be a characteristic of a particular group of people, and you're trying to do something, say for a football team, well, that happens to be the characteristic. It doesn't mean that something bad has happened or someone is nefariously cooking the books and trying to achieve something. And that's the problem with diversity. It's been raised, this word, and it has this undeserved positive valence. And if you look at equity, well, that means equal outcomes. It doesn't mean equality. And I think a lot of people get bamboozled on this, because equality means everyone has an equal shot as much as we can ensure that. We remove as many artificial barriers as we can. And then what happens after that is based on talent, a little bit of luck, perhaps equity, sweat equity, so to speak. Equity means we have the same outcome. It means that, no, we don't all start at the same starting gate. We all have to finish together. And we have to do what's necessary to make that happen, which means a directing of resources towards people who are not doing as well.
Who decides?
Exactly. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. There's an experiment that I've never done in my classes, but I've heard about this. I don't know if it's one of those stories you hear, but the idea to achieve equity in a class is that you tell everyone that we're going to put all of the grades in a pool from an exam. And then we're going to divide the points available by the number of students, and everyone's going to get the same grade, which is equity. When you think about it, it's equity. Everyone's going to get a 78 on the exam. Wait. I scored 100. Yes, but Nancy Sue over here, she scored a 58. And so we're going to it all evens out. And so we all cross the finish line together. Well, the result by the end of the quarter or the semester, there's no one's working. Why should I? I'm carrying these people. And so that's an idea. That's how equity works. And it's never works by raising all boats. It actually works by tearing things down. And you see an example of this where honors programs at various schools are being eliminated because they're too white, they're too Asian, and they're not showing enough diversity. And we don't want to unfairly include someone in there. And so we're simply going to end the program. End of problem, right?
I think sometimes we also run into issues where maybe decisions aren't being made based upon merit, but it has nothing to do with race, let's say. So going back to the football thing, somebody will get a job as a head coach because the owner likes them. Now, another white guy, let's say it is a white guy who gets the job, another white guy wouldn't stand a chance because the owner doesn't like them. And it's a good old boys club, and a lot of businesses are like that. Do you think sometimes people misdiagnose the problem and they say, it's because of race, as opposed to it's a result of nepotism or whatever it may be? I
think that's true, and I do think that on the upside of bringing, opening up the access, and I don't like that word, but we'll use it for the moment. Bringing people the idea is to give them access to the old boys club. So that I want to be the friend of someone who 25 years from now may hire me as a coach, that kind of thing. And so I think that would be a response that you'd get from someone if you said, that said, I do think there's lots of other factors that play into a final decision that have nothing to do with talent, nothing to do with merit, has nothing to do with dislike because someone happens to be a certain ethnicity. It has to do with, that's my buddy. That's my man from 20 years ago, and I want to give him a job, give him a leg up. That's what this is all about, that kind of thing.
Well, the book is called DEI Exposed, How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education. They didn't quite topple higher education, though. Yeah. Can still be saved?
It still can be saved. We're on the way to saving it.
Do you have any parting words for the Garbage Gang, Dr. Ridgley?
Just that I'm delighted. I think that your audience is the salt of the earth. And nothing more and better can be said. I am with you in the gang, and I hope to see you out on the range at some point.
That's right. We'll have to do that. We'll get it on tape for the entire Garbage Gang to tune in. Any other parting words? Where can we get the book?
Oh, well, you can get the book on Amazon. I highly recommend it. You can get it in all 4 popular formats. You've got the softback, you got the hardback, you have the Kindle, but you also have audiobook for workout people and commuting, that kind of thing.
Did you do the voice on it?
If I had known, I would have had you do the voice on it. My voice is not the best for this sort of thing. I hired a professional. Well, the publisher hired a professional who does a great job, I think.
Sounds good. Is it like James Earl Jones or anything like that?
No, not quite as deep as that. But I did do the audio in my previous book, Brutal Minds.
Minds.
Yeah. And so if you want, my wife listens to me all the time, but you can have the pleasure of listening to me for 7.5 hours on that book. But if you're really interested in what's happening on the college campus today and want to understand the arguments that are being made about DEI and understand why it's such a contentious subject and why you're being criticized or you're being vilified and being called names when you don't deserve that, I think that DEI Exposed is the book for you.
That's right. Check it out, ladies and gentlemen, one more time. DEI Exposed, how the biggest con of the century almost toppled higher education. We want to thank everybody for tuning in. Check out The Garbage Gang on all major podcast platforms right here on YouTube. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, become a member of The Garbage Gang. We miss you, Ellie. Daddy loves you. Thanks for tuning into the Mike G and the Garbage Gang podcast. If you want to be a proud member of the Garbage Gang, we need you to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out one of the recommended videos, and comment. Tell us what you think. We love having you as a member of the Garbage Gang. We'll see you next time.